Now, with the elimination of the Bracero program in December of 1964, job opportunities, which for many years millions of Mexicans had worked under, evaporated. Borderland historians note that Mexico now had to confront the formidable challenge of creating new employment opportunities at home. Now, the answer to the crisis was Mexico's stimulation of industrialization along the border of the United States. Given that large numbers of unemployed ex-braceros had settled in the Mexican border region, foreign corporations as well as domestic investors were invited to set up assembly plants on the border cities. And so within a few years, border factories mushroomed and employment opportunities proliferated. Multinational corporations from the United States, Asia, and Europe found that abundant cheap labor pools in centers like Ciudad Juarez and Tijuana and the proximities of these cities to the lucrative U.S. market were ideal factors in addressing the problems of rising production costs and international competition. So by the late 60s and early 70s, a who's who of leading global companies operated border plants engaged in a variety of assembly operations. And in time, some high-tech industries made their appearance on the border as well. So between 1970 and 1984, the number of border maquilas grew from about 120 to 585, according to some scholars, whereas the number of employees rose from 20,000 to over 184,000. So most of these plants were heavily concentrated in Ciudad Juarez and Tijuana, whereas Matamoros, Reynosa, and Mexicali emerged as second-tier centers of maquiladoras. And then there were places like Nuevo Laredo, Piedras Negras, Ciudad Acuña, and Nogales as what they call third-tier centers. And then eventually select cities in Mexico's interior also embraced the border industrialization program. Now, the significance of what is known as the BIP, the Border Industrialization Program, in relation to migration is that it did not diminish the flow of workers to the United States as anticipated. On the contrary, the program encouraged international human movement. And in the 1960s and 1970s, critics of the maquiladoras rightly pointed out that the original purpose of the program to alleviate the pronounced male employment at the border was not accomplished. Indeed, as scholars note, at the time the program began, women who had only recently joined the workforce and who were paid lower wages than the men are going to make up well over 80% of the maquiladora labor force. And just like the Bracero program, the maquiladoras primed both legal and illegal immigration to the United States because new generations of workers from the interior of Mexico are going to be lured to the border region in search of factory jobs. Large numbers of workers, especially men, are going to find the low-paying, tedious assembly work highly unattractive. And many of those who did become factory workers, including women, quickly familiarized themselves, as some scholars suggest, with the higher wages and better employment opportunities north of the border, and they left their maquiladora jobs in search of employment in the United States. Now, because most ordinary people did not qualify for legal immigration because of U.S. policy changes that took effect after 1965, of which we will explore in a little while, the only alternative for determined workers became undocumented immigration, or what will turn into illegal immigration. And U.S. employers were eager to capture this lucrative labor market. But we're going to go to a film clip on a documentary that is optional for you to watch in this class, where there is an assignment you will see in the long essay category of Latina women. And we're going to take a look at a film clip from Maquilapolis and take a look at women's experience in the maquila industry here in Tijuana.
Yo me llamo Carmen Durán. soy empleada de maquiladora. Yo he trabajado en 9 maquiladoras. Yo tenía 13 años cuando llegué a Tijuana. Y estaba sola en Tijuana. Y aquí ya me quedé.
En los años 60 escuchamos por primera vez la palabra maquiladora. La maquila venía a cambiar todo porque ofrecían salarios mejores que en otras partes del país. Eso es lo que veníamos buscando los migrantes a esta tierra.
Empresas de otros países vienen a nuestro país por los incentivos fiscales y por la mano de obra barata.
Empecé a trabajar ahí. Al principio me empezó a salir sangre por la nariz. Y ahí lo que me empecé a enfermar más fue de los riñones, por motivo de que pues no te dejan tomar agua, no te dejan ir al baño. Nos decían los supervisores, los jefes, el componente que nosotros estábamos fabricando, el componente de Flybass se iba a Indonesia porque la mano de obra ya era más barata. Lo único que querían ellos era pagar menos y ganar más.
Mi nombre es María de Lourdes Luján Aguirre, tengo 29 años. Tengo la cámara prendida y voy a empezar con un poco de contarles de mi vida. Miren, aquí yo vivo en la colonia Chilpancingo. Esta es una toma de donde yo vivo. Ahí está el río, donde cruzan las personas. Ahorita va a pasar un transporte de aquí de la colonia por el río. Y van pasando las chivas por el puente, que ellas también las utilizan.
Ahí van los trabajadores. Los de sur son operadores. Las batas tienen, el color de las batas tienen un rango. Okay. Cuando te ven con la bata, saben qué es lo que eres dentro de la empresa, si eres jefe de grupo, supervisor.
Decían que hacíamos mejor el trabajo por nuestras manos chiquitas y ágiles y por ser una fuerza laboral supuestamente dócil y barata.
Dentro de la globalización, la mujer trabajadora de la maquila entra como una especie de mercancía. Si esta mercancía no es productiva, si no es atractiva para esta globalización, porque ya ella se empieza a defender o empieza a buscar optativas de derechos o X, la buscan en otra parte. Para mí como mujer de la maquila, para mí es preocupante porque somos objeto de trabajo, o sea, objeto de labor.
Again, students, you have the option of watching this particular film, and I encourage you to do so that you can write an essay on Latina women's experiences. There is also another film that's made available for you, Made in LA. We will capture some segments of that in next week's presentation or the last presentation of the course. Now, what is amazing about the labor conditions facing women today is that relatively little has changed over the 40 years that the Border Industrialization Program has been in operation. And just like the Bracero program, workers have benefited international capital at the expense of their human rights. Michael Moore provides a pertinent comment concerning the conditions today. Let's see what Michael Moore has said about the Border Industrialization Program.
I went down to these Mexican border towns in the mid-'80s. They were called maquiladoras, and when they first had, this sort of the first trade agreements between Mexico and the United States, and everyone was saying how this was going to raise Mexico out of poverty, and things were going to be so great, and within 10 years they'd all be driving shiny new cars in Mexico. And I went down there and saw the incredible poverty in these Mexican border towns. 15 years later, I went back. Not a damn thing had changed. Here's all these workers working for all these American corporations, and you just go across the street and you found people living in the same horrid conditions, the same poverty existing, and you had to ask, well, who was benefiting from this? Well, who benefited were these American corporations. During the 1990s, they became even more wealthy. They posted record profits, larger record profits, and the people in Mexico just continued to suffer. It was all a big scam.
Okay, so at least we have one outside observer attempting to appreciate the significance of the border industrialization program.